Welcome to the True Wealth Investors Real Estate Podcast. Creative investing strategies to help you build true wealth. I'm your host, Chad Harris. All right, welcome everybody. I am Chad Harris, and this is the True Wealth Investors Podcast. I am really glad to have you back listening with us. I always appreciate it. And I ask that if you enjoy the content and enjoy the interviews we have, that you please subscribe to the channel, rate and review the podcast. That helps other people find out about it, helps us help more people. And as always, I'm always here to answer questions. I love helping everybody out. So feel free to leave a comment with a question, or you can always email me, chad@truewealthinvestors.com. All right. So today I am excited to have a guest, Scott Krusemark, here to share a lot of really great information. You're going to be excited by what he has to share. We've been talking and planning this out for a while. And even the gift that he has for everybody, a calculator to help you know how to better assess your deals and make your offers, which I won't get fully into, but that he does have that gift for everybody listening, which I'm really excited about. You'll benefit from it. And Scott is out of Canton, Ohio, and he is going to be the main guest speaker at the Greater Dayton Real Estate Investors Association here in February. That's February 7th. And Scott and I have crossed paths at a number of events, speaker trainings and masterminds, and I think a business vision workshop at one point too.
Oh, yeah.
And so we've talked many times, and I'm really happy to have him here. I know you're going to like it. So welcome, Scott. Glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a long time coming.
Yeah.
So I mentioned you were from Canton, but give us some more information about you. What type of investing do you like to do? And
So
what's your background?
we're mostly single family houses. We have some garages that some of which are like semi-detached from the single family houses, and we rent those out separately. Invested in some storage units. We've got some commercial properties, just small, like a blinds company downstairs, and then upstairs is a single apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment. Mostly inside the city limits of Canton, which if you're Cantonite, you know that's like nobody wants to be inside the city limits, but we make good money there. So hey, what can I say? We're also
Sounds real similar to Dayton, Ohio, where it's the
I think
exact
there's a
same
lot of
conversation.
similarities. Yes, I think there is, and similar sized towns, not quite the same. I think Dayton's a little bigger. We're about an hour and 10 minutes south of Cleveland, so it's not considered inside our market, but it's not that far away. So and there's properties up there that are also pretty weird. So we're
Well, I
also
was interestingly, I mean, the most Ohio markets have been so depressed for so long, or at least for the last 10, 15 years. But I've seen on Zillow and Redfin where the major markets in Ohio are expected to be, 3 or 4 of the top 10 markets in the country next year.
yeah, well,
So it's really interesting what we have going on.
yeah, I was looking at a statistic, and it doesn't affect us. Well, it affects us as investors, but this was out of the normal realtor. In the last 5 years, the average price in both Canton and in Akron, which is Stark County and Summit County, has risen from 150,000 on the average to just short of 250,000. That's a huge jump. And
Yeah, that's a
in
serious spike.
4 or 5 years. I mean, that's and most of it's been in the last 2. I mean, it's the same thing you've experienced. It was fairly flat, and then it just went straight up.
Yeah.
So yeah, and in addition to the single family homes, we're also hard money lenders. I work a lot with my wife. She does the hard stuff. She does the back office stuff, and so she she does like the taxes and the collections and that stuff. Um, and I'm also a coach and I teach. So obviously I'm coming to Dayton to teach. Um, and so that'll be interesting. I enjoy teaching. It gives me a lot of
Yeah.
personal satisfaction.
Yeah, I'm excited about you being on here. A lot of people who listen to the episodes don't have the opportunity to meet the guests in person. And so this really is a good opportunity for everybody listening who's really excited about what you have to share to get to come meet you in person next week. So that is pretty cool, rare opportunity. So fill me in on when you got started in real estate. How did you get started?
So my wife and I have been doing this together, as I said. I'd been or I still am actually technically a computer consultant for 40 plus years. I've been in computers almost, let's see, 1980. So whatever that is. So 50, 60 years, a long time. And um okay. Anyway, so very successful, very, high level type person. And in 2002, we read the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, which I think is a great book. So we
Yeah.
said, "Oh, this is cool." So we went out and put 6 offers in. We looked at a whole bunch of houses, but we ended up with 6 offers, and every single one of them was accepted. Now,
Huh. Did you just
yeah,
find 6 amazing deals or what was going on there?
yeah. That's what we did. We found 6 amazing deals that we paid too much for. So because we didn't have enough funds to be able to do it, we were using our own personal funds for this in this case, and so and banks actually too, and so we turned 3 of them down. So we ended up buying a 10 unit and 2 single families from 3 separate sellers on the same day. Don't do that.
Wow.
Not a good
That's
move.
a serious start. Yeah.
And we overpaid for them. So that was our start, but we took action. We subsequently got the Carlton Sheets course and learned a few things that we had done wrong. And then we discovered and understand this is all without anybody local, no education of any kind except for the book. And so we then discovered that there was a local real estate group, the Akron REIA, AC REIA, so we're actually one county south, but we didn't know about the Stark County one. Anyway, so we joined the Akron REIA and then subsequently discovered OREA, the national convention. And so we started our education and actually getting to know what it was that we were actually doing. So by 2008, we had taken enough action that we had 27 doors. And then 2008 hit, and it hit us hard because about half the properties, the first half, we had used the algorithm that we'd understood from day one, which was you pay too much. Then we learned our lessons and started buying correctly. So the second half, about 10 of the properties were seriously overfinanced, and about 10 of them were proper. Then 2008 hit, and of course, those ones that were overfinancing, including the 10 unit, took us down. The thing about downturns is that unless we had a property that dropped from value from 45,000 to 12,000 in value. We still have that property because if you don't have to sell it, you don't have to realize the loss. But we had to realize the loss on half of the properties. So we gave most of them, we just gave back to the bank. We did declare bankruptcy, and because we had negative cash flow out the yin yang. As a computer consultant, we had lots of income, but it wasn't enough. And so we learned our lessons. OREA was a tremendous teacher. We had a lot of local investors that were part of our REIA, like GD REIA, where you can learn from other people. So we learned a lot. And like I said, the second half were good. And we have most of those still. We dumped our losers.
So thinking back to that was 08.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't start investing until late 2012, 2013. 2013 is when I went full time into it. And so I was on the tail end, right? Once I started investing, most things were going up. Not necessarily quickly in the
Yeah.
beginning,
Yeah.
but long term, that was the projection. And so were there any indications leading up to that, right? In that going into '08, were there things that you saw that you thought, uh-oh, things aren't going well, or the market is going to swing, or what was that
Well,
like?
they were there and we saw them. We just didn't understand them. So we saw, prices were outrageous. They were, that sounds like today.
Right, yeah, because that's
Right,
what I'm thinking
exactly.
of.
Yeah.
On the news, they're talking about this inverted yield and
Yeah.
when is the downturn coming and
Well, there are some major differences with 2008. Because in 2008 there was a serious overabundance of properties. We had too many. So we were inverted from where we are now in terms of right now we have a serious shortage. But
right, inventory still
right. And
very low.
so there's a curve that it's kind of like a sine curve. Well, it goes up slow and then falls fast. But other than that, it's that kind of curve. And 2008, it was it was a vertical wall. And so we saw that the prices it was becoming harder and harder to find good deals. Mostly because the prices were so insane. Because one of the characteristics of that kind of thing, even though there's an oversupply, prices continue to rise, which is counterintuitive. And so we bought a few. We'd kind of slowed down our buying by 2008, just because it's like we don't want to overpay for the properties. And so at that point, then we started to see this, it's like, well, there's boatloads of houses. And then 2008 occurred. We tried very, desperately to stay afloat, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. And that was what pushed us actually into bankruptcy. Had we realized what was going on, we would have said, here, banks, here's a bunch of properties, and taken the easy way out. In the end, we lost those properties anyway. And if you do the deed in lieu of foreclosure, it doesn't look as bad on your credit score. So
Okay.
if they actually have to go through the bankruptcy process, they're going to let you know, and it affects your score. But so
Yeah.
we learned a lot of lessons, both getting into 2008, this coming downturn, which I think is still 2-3 years out. That's my personal opinion. Is this will be the third one that we've been through, because we were essentially when we came in 2002, the market was kind of like 2009-ish, 2010. It was really easy to buy. And so we kind of saw those things. And obviously now we've had the experience of a serious downturn. I think this is a once in a lifetime downturn personally, in 2008. And so we learned both from the process and also what bankruptcy really means. So if someone's in trouble, there's some sympathy there, because I understand, as we've been there.
Right. I think there
And
were some major differences just in the economy in
yes,
'08. And we can talk about how prices seem drastically high right now,
yeah,
but inventory is really low now, where there were deals everywhere then. I
right,
think then you had a lot of speculative buying where
yeah,
they knew it was a bad deal, but prices had been going up so drastically that it didn't really matter
yep, yep,
how bad it was. You
yep,
could resell it for a profit
yeah.
in 3 months or
Time
six
healed
months.
all wounds.
Yeah,
um,
until it didn't, right?
until it didn't, and then it really didn't.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so we recovered from it. Um, the biggest thing for us is that we stayed with it. We didn't give up.
Right.
You
Which,
know,
I mean, there's so many people who want to get into real estate and never take that first step. And you both jumped in full speed, with 6 offers and three
yeah,
purchases right away.
and
And
then
then
kept
for
going.
and kept going. And then for a lot of people going through '08 and dealing with bankruptcy, and a lot of people that would have ended their investing as well,
Yeah,
right? So how
right.
did you keep going through that? What was that?
We identified that real estate is one of the few asset classes where there's something physical. And so long term, it has value because it's physical. I mean, if I talk to, pick up a piece of stock on a stock company, yeah, it kind of sort of represents the company, but it only represents it, And so if the company does badly, I have no control. And, so that it's like I can't do anything to kind of make it better. Whereas with the house, I can put in new flooring, I can add a new wing. Not that we've done that, but we can replace the roof, so we can make improvements to it, and we have some control of it. And because it's physical, people need housing that it retains at least some value forever. Okay.
Yeah,
And so it makes it much, it's a long-term question as opposed to a short-term question. And so, yet if you're doing rentals, now that statement that I made about physical assets is assuming that you're doing rentals. If you do fix and flip, that's a different story. It still has value. It's just now your time frame short. But
yeah,
with rentals, yeah, it's not a lot per house, but it keeps going. That's where you store your wealth, and it builds your wealth. And when you get to the point where you go from being debt with um, the bank loans or whatever kind of loans, whatever kind of debt you've got, and you go free and clear, your income takes a huge jump. And I use the example that says, okay, so if I buy 20 houses, and most of the time with debt, most of the time I'm probably going to walk away money. So I've got set asides for all sorts of things. Walk away money, I'm going to pull in $100, $200 a month. Okay. It's, I mean, different people will give different answers, but let's say it's $100 a month. I got 20 properties. That's $2,000 a month, right? I don't know about you, but I would have trouble living on $2,000 a month, right?
yeah, yeah,
Okay. But run it forward 7 to 15 years and the debt's all paid off. Now I'm looking at more like 5, 6, 700. Let's use 500 because it makes the math easy. Times 20, that's $10,000 a month. I can live on $10,000 a month. I'd be okay with that.
yeah. And with
Okay.
rents
It's
increasing and
right. And that
appreciation,
just
and
gets right. And that just gets better and better over time. So, we think about the fact that a lot of people think, oh, I got to have 50, 100 houses to even break even. And, I got to have that many. Well, the reality is you don't. You know, yes, you won't make a lot in those 7 to 15 years while you're paying off the debt. I mean, $2,000 a month's non-trivial, and it's definitely a nice supplement. But once they get paid off, then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I can retire. So it's not a
yeah.
short-term goal. So it's a different way of looking at it, and a lot of people miss that it really is a long-term plan. And the reason I said 7 to 15 is if I take that $2,000 extra that I'm making and living off of something else, take that 2,000 and apply it to the debt, I can run that 15 to 20 year loan down to 7 years. And all of a sudden now in 7 years, I can get it all paid off. Now, if I'm, got a regular job and I've got extra money from that job, oh, apply it in against the loans. And
Right.
the rule is you always apply it to only one loan. So you run it down quick and then use the money that you would have paid for that mortgage, apply it to the second one. It's called the snowball effect.
Yeah, I remember the first time I learned about loan constant and how as you pay your loan down, but your payment stays the same,
Right.
right? But as you pay down that principal, your risk actually is going up drastically, which I never understood that. Um, and
Yeah.
then when I heard it, I thought, oh no, that's
Yeah.
right. We need to focus on paying just one off and get it paid off quickly, right? And not
Right.
linger with that high equity stake and low loan value. That's a problem.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, part of the question is, what's your long-term goal? Because, if your long-term goal is financial freedom, then you have to have something equivalent to a passive income. I mean, real estate's never truly passive, but you can make it so that it's low maintenance.
yeah, for sure.
And using debt, I mean, using debt is risky if you don't understand what you're doing. If you understand it, it's actually safer. It's counterintuitive.
Interesting. So explain that. Yeah, explain how it's safe for using debt.
So so assuming that the property cash flows, all right, there's an assumption built into that. Okay, so we are walking away with $100 a month, or even if it's zero, it still fits in that category. Then the tenant or tenants in this case are paying off the debt, so you have no more money going into it. Now, keep in mind, I said that there were set asides. So those set asides are like, I know that roof's only going to last me another 15 years or 10 years or what, I'm going to have a hot water heater go out or a furnace. So
Right.
you set aside money to that future expense. You set aside money for property management. Even if you're doing the property management yourself, you set it aside. Okay. And then there's the kind of the day-to-day maintenance, plumbing, somebody pushes something down the drain and you need to deal with that. So those are the things that you set it aside. And typically I use, vacancy was the third one, not the maintenance. Maintenance was the first one, the vacancy rate. So that in any area there's going to be some vacancies, and you just assume that. And so, if I have in our area, when right now it's about 5% vacancy, and those numbers are hard to come by because there's such a variance and nobody reports it. But you can if you talk to the property managers around the area, you'll get a general sense of what it is. It's about 5% right now. And so when we got into real estate, Canton was suffering from 40% vacancy. It's like,
Holy
oh
mackerel.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is why our 10 unit was never full. But and then at the same time, we bought some properties over in Pittsburgh, and they were suffering from 0.5%, not even 1%, 0.5%.
Really?
So if someone got evicted, they couldn't find another place to rent. So they were actually pretty good about paying, which is good because it was remote.
Yeah.
We were happy about that. So anyway, so debt, once you've got the system set up and you've got those set asides, then the set asides deal with those sudden expenses that show up, and sorry, and deal with, so, and then the properties essentially take care of themselves, at least financially. You still gonna have to pay attention. And so you've got an asset. I mean, if I put money into the stock market, I have no control. Whereas with, a rental, I have some control. Worst case is
And
I can go out and rent it myself, if I use a property management company or however, a lot of different structures.
so I guess if you're paying all cash, let's say for $100,000 house, then you are in essence risking $100,000 and the return on that $100,000.
right,
So as long as you're setting aside reserves and things to handle all of the normal interactions that come with a rental property and the
right.
people that fill rental properties, then if you're putting 10,000 into the deal, you're risking 10,000, right? So is that kind of how debt makes it lower
Yeah.
risk?
So, so if you're over leveraged, and I define over leveraged at 70% or higher of the loan to value. All right.
Great.
So the issue is that if you go too high on the loan versus the value, then it does become risky, because if it goes vacant, you're going to have to pay for it. And when it's lower than 70%, your mortgage payment is such that it's painful but not catastrophic. At the other end of the spectrum, if you have no debt, and this is one of those issues where I'm going to disagree with Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman and Life and Air and all of that, because they believe
Right.
in the debt free. And I'll come back to why I think that that's actually an important idea, debt free. Is that, if I have, so the easiest way, and I'm going to make the numbers extreme so that, because I'm going to use 90% as the leverage ratio. Don't do that, but it'll make the numbers easier to understand. So if I have $100,000 and I pay cash and go out and buy a property and it goes up 10%, I have 110% worth of money, right? It's in equity. Okay. So I have 110, right? 10%.
Right.
Makes perfect sense. If I take that same, and this is where I get into, I wouldn't actually do it this way, but it makes sense, is I take that and buy 10 houses where I take $10,000, you get a $90,000 loan on each of the houses. I've still spent $100,000, but now I control $1 million worth of property. Okay. So I have $100,000 in equity, which is the same as one house. Now I got it spread over 10.
Before.
All right.
Yeah.
Now I get the same 10% appreciation. Call it inflation if you want to, because that's really, those two are tied pretty close. So I've got 10% in appreciation. Now I have $1.1 million. It's 1,100,000. So my equity doubled.
And interesting, if you have that $100,000, each of those houses are $100,000. They go up 10%. You get $10,000 in appreciation. You've invested $10,000. You are now getting a 100% return
Right. exactly.
money, right?
Yeah, you got 100% return. And
Yeah.
then, I mean, you can't eat equity. So, that would be marked as you'd have to sell it. And there's some other complicating factors if you count inflation and stuff like that. But still, you increase the amount of dollars that you've got available.
Right. Which in
Right.
the end, I agree with you. I love hearing it. I get excited
Right.
by it and just
Yeah.
talking about it.
Right.
But in the end, what we're trying to build, right? In the beginning, everybody starts and you're trying to get cash flow or more cash quickly. But in the end, what we want is that net worth,
Yes.
right? Because
Right.
that is really what we can leverage into
Right.
bigger deals or changing our life.
Right.
And the net worth is built with equity.
Right.
So,
So I'm going to come back to step back to because I introduced a concept and I want people to understand why I believe so. The For 80% of the US population, they don't understand money well enough to be able to invest. They're going to go out and buy a boat or they're going to buy a TV. So for 80% of the population, they need to be debt free. They do not need to use this leverage concept. That's 80%. Might be 90%. I like 80% to describe it. That means if you understand leverage, and it's not a trivial thing to understand. If you understand leverage, then you're going to grow way faster. I mean, I know a couple of people that started out using small amounts of leverage and then paid it all off, and now they've got enough properties that the new income that they've got is enough to buy another property. So they are running debt free with growth. Okay. Now they've got 110 properties and 110 nightmares. So, hey, that's what tenants are, right?
yeah, if they're not today, they may be tomorrow,
Yeah,
right?
that's
That
right.
they will
That's right.
come.
Now, we talk about the negativity of the tenants, but the reality is 95, 98% of the tenants are great tenants. They pay their rent on time and they'll move, but and then you got a couple every so often that are challenging. We'll say it that way. Um, but when we're talking about, so in a group setting like a RIA or just talking between people, the stories that are the good stories are those guys. They paid their rent. It's a terrible story, right?
Well, yeah.
Right?
And the ones who paid the rent and never reached out for anything, you forget them. I don't remember their names,
Oh
but
yeah,
there are quite a few names that I still remember to this day, the problem ones.
yeah, the problem child, yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
so the I believe that, like I said, 80% of the population needs to do debt free. So the Dave Ramseys and the Susie Ormans are absolutely providing a service to the country. But if you're an investor and you actually understand leverage, then it makes sense to use leverage. Now, I wouldn't go to 90%. I'd be down at 60%, 60, 70%. And as you get older, that
Yeah.
percentage needs to get even lower. And we're a little bit further along. And so our percentage now is about 45% loan to value.
Okay.
And some of that's because we've paid the mortgages down. So we're in that cycle of, we'll go out and buy something so it goes back up, and then we'll bring it down, and then it goes back up, then we bring it down, and but we're using the leverage to be able to buy additional properties. Now that's 45% across all of the properties. So some properties have much higher leverage and some properties have lower leverage. Right now, we don't have any properties that are debt free except our personal home. I do believe that personally you should be debt free. So our home was the first thing we paid off. And then now we're working on the mortgages. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a progression too for any investor that when they start and get in, they have to look at the specific deal, right? And not get over leveraged on the specific individual deal.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
then as you grow, you start to look at it as a portfolio as a whole.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of the progression as an investor. For people who don't understand why to pay off your home before the rentals, why? What's the explanation for that? Why is that beneficial, or why would you look at it differently?
Well, because it doesn't make a profit. Okay.
So Kiyosaki wouldn't call it an asset, right?
He would call it a doodad, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
That's what he calls it. And if you ever play the game cash flow, that's exactly what they've got. They've got doodads. And doodads are everything that doesn't build toward your expanding, cash flowing assets. So ideally, if you have $10,000, you don't go buy the TV. Well, you don't go buy the boat, a little more pricey. Okay. You go out and buy a cash flowing asset and then use the cash flow to buy the boat.
right. Yeah.
So that now you have cash flowing asset so that when the boat is paid off, now you have more income. Right.
Still have the asset. Yeah.
Right. And so, getting rid of personal debt has the advantage that, if times get tough, let's assume that we have another 2008. Okay. Well, the individual properties, the mortgages on the individual rentals, worst case is I can drop the rent so that I'm at least covering my expenses. Okay. So I lose all the profit. Well, that profit was what I was living off of potentially. All right. Well, if I have a mortgage on my house, where's that money coming from? If I lose my job, where's the money for the mortgage coming from? For the house, for the personal property.
Right.
So eliminating personal debt because it doesn't have a corresponding income stream makes a lot of sense. And I fully believe that personal debt should go to zero. Now, am I going to go out and buy a car with cash? Well, I don't have that much cash, especially nowadays. Prices of cars have gotten so bad. But so I'm going to consider debt, but I'm going to aggressively pay it down. So maybe I'll take out a 7-year loan, but I'm going to pay it as if it's a 3-year loan. So I'm going to pay aggressively. And you should be doing that to your rentals because, once you've gotten, like I said, once you've gotten the rentals to the point where you did use debt to get them and to expand and to, grow your business, and you've reached the point where you're like, okay, I'm stable, I'm good, I got enough properties, then you transition from how does Venus say it? From there's dreamer, beginner, growth. I think that's what empire builder. I have another category that she doesn't have, which is maintainer, and then there's ender, also called
Okay.
spender. So I like to add in that maintainer because there's a point where it's like I'm big enough that I don't need to grow anymore, or I've slowed down my growth to the point where if a good deal drops in my lap, I'm going to take advantage of it, but I'm not going to go out and actively look for it. I call that.
Yeah, I think that concept is something I struggled with for years early on because I liked the concept of paying down the debt, right? I liked working towards a paid off portfolio of rentals, but at the same time, I was growing.
Yeah,
And so on one hand, I'm trying to pay off debt. On the other hand, I'm trying to borrow more to grow the portfolio. And it took me a long time of wrestling with those two, where I realized as long as, I have to have an end in mind. What is it I'm building?
right,
And as long as I'm growing, then my job isn't really to pay off that debt. My job is to reduce my payments and loan constants so that it reduces the risk. And then once I have my number, then it's time to pay off the debt. And
right,
that could be selling some units, right?
right.
There's a bunch of different ways to pay off that
Yeah,
debt. But those kind of two different things. I wrestled with that for a while.
yeah.
So
And I agree with you. I mean, and it's a tough balance. because you have to look at, and each person's balance is going to be different, because it'll depend on, what's their long-term goal. If they're, use an example in Ohio, if they're a teacher in Ohio, their retirement's really good. So, but they got to reach retirement age. And then, so their base income, just because of that, or Social Security or whatever, you don't need that much more over the top, but it's really nice to have it, you know.
Yeah.
And so if you're in the phase where you're madly growing, if you're in your 30s and 40s, you know, it's great to build a huge portfolio. I think, I used the example earlier of 20 properties. I think I'd probably target 30. Because we've got multiple things going on, we're not doing a huge amount of expansion. We're more in the maintainer phase, personally. But it's having 30 properties that are each cash flowing, $100, $200 a month. It's an okay income. I mean, it's a nice supplement to something else that you're doing. But then once it pays off, yeah, that's a livable. That's
Yeah.
livable. And it, I technically retired probably about 5 years ago. Went from full-time computer consulting to part-time. And what I really loved wasn't so much the financial freedom, but it was the time freedom. I like going to the breakfasts. So our area has 2 breakfasts every Wednesday and Thursday. Well, one Thursday and one Friday, on Wednesday. And so I love to be able to do that. Well, as a full-time computer consultant, I couldn't go to any of those. And,
Yeah.
And as you and I both know, going to leadership boardroom, that takes some time out of your schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. Those
And
mastermind retreats,
yeah,
everybody there has a flexible schedule. It's not on Saturday, Sunday, right? It's
that's right.
midweek. You got your travel
Yeah,
time and
yeah. And so, that time benefit is my why. And we don't have any relatives anywhere in Ohio, so we have to go to DC or Kansas City to see relatives. That takes time and money too.
well, and I don't think if people have never had time freedom, I don't think you can understand the value of it or the like price tag you would put on it until
Right.
you have it.
Yeah.
Once you have it, it's hard to understand living without it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah. And
yeah.
I do believe that while you're in the, you know, unless you can get the real estate to actually provide your funding for you so that you can actually live on it, I think having a, regular job, and especially if you love your job, and hopefully you find a job that you love, but if you don't, either way, if you stay with it long enough to build your empire, that you've got, a decent number of properties and you start paying them off, then, life, yeah, it's painful for those growth years. And I mean, unless you love your job. I mean, I know several people that, that just love their jobs. And I'm one of those, actually. I love doing the computer consulting. It's like, to me, it's like, some people do the crossword puzzles or the Sudoku or whatever. I get paid for that. Same kind of thing.
You can't beat that, right?
And no, so I still do it because I enjoy it. But
Well, and I don't think I think time freedom is just that. You get to do what you want,
right,
right? And that doesn't necessarily mean work less. It may just mean working on your own terms,
yes, yeah,
and so, as any entrepreneur can attest, there's times where you work a lot. You work a lot more than 40 hours a week
oh
and a
yeah,
lot
oh
longer
yeah,
hours. But for me, it's some of the simple things, the kids have a lazy morning and I get to eat breakfast with them, or something as simple as that.
Yeah.
I really value that freedom,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And one thing for us as a family, we always take vacation, which we homeschool our kids, so we have that additional freedom. But we take our spring break, when nobody else goes on spring break at the end of April and early
Yeah.
May instead of when everybody else is there.
Yeah. Right.
And just there are some really simple things that have huge benefits.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the things we wanted to make sure we talked about was how to assess a deal, right? How to
Sure.
look
Yeah.
at
We
a
had talked.
deal.
Okay.
And
So
so a
I'll
lot
do
of
it.
people,
Yeah.
when I talk to, and then it's especially newer investors or people wanting to get into it, but it's not even necessarily newer investors. I think a lot of people that is their struggle, even if they've been in real estate a while, because the numbers always change, right?
They do.
You can get used to assessing deals and saying, well, as long as I buy it at 50 and the rehab is whatever, 10, it's a good deal.
Right.
Well, that's going to change, real quick what that
Yeah.
actual number is. You need to be able to figure out how
Sure.
it's a good deal in any market. So, we had talked about kind of running through the numbers. How do you look at a flip deal and assess whether it's a good deal? How do you look at a buy and hold deal and assess it?
Right. Okay. So I would say that from my perspective, there are three equations. So the first one is the fix and flip. Okay. So you think about the end buyer, and the end buyer is a homeowner, right? So how does a homeowner evaluate a, whether, how much they want to pay for a property? So they're going to evaluate it by going, well, let's see, that house is $100,000. That house is $100,000. This house is $100,000. Then the house that I'm looking at, called the subject property, it better be $100,000. So it's the comps.
The
So we
comps,
use
yeah.
the equivalent of what the realtors call comps to determine the price because they're fixed up already. Well, we're going to buy houses that aren't fixed up, so we use the term ARV. So it's after repair value. Okay, so the after repair value should be the same as the comps that come from the realtors. Okay, now you have to take some adjustments in there for, this one's a 3 bedroom and 1,200 square feet, and this one's a 3 bedroom 2 bath at 1,500 square feet. Well, I need to adjust the numbers a little bit, but it's the same concept. You're building this number based on what the comparables are that are already fixed up. That becomes your after repair value. Then the second number you need for the fix and flip is the list of repairs. And so, if you're going to replace a kitchen, you're looking at, depending on whether it's a low end rental or a high end, fix and flip, anywhere between 5 and 15,000. You can spend 40 if you want, but we're investors, so
Yeah.
we're going to figure out how to do it cheaper. So you have to go through the list of all the repairs to get it into the condition that would be considered the after repair value. So, if you're doing a fix and flip, you'd kind of look around the neighborhood and say, well, that house has granite, that house has corian, then I better have something that's in that same kind of range. If they have Formica and they have Formica, then I'm going to be able to put in Formica. So you need to,
Right.
to balance your repairs accordingly. So once you've gotten the number that is the cost of the repairs, and you probably want to add in some holding costs and some financing costs, that I just lump those into the repairs category. Then the basic equation, which does change over time, the basic equation is after repair value times 70% minus the repairs. So that 30% of the after repair value is your profit. At least that's the theory. It usually works out at closer to 25 to 20 to 25%. So if you have $100,000 house, 70% of that's 70. If you've got 20,000 in repairs, your maximum offer is 50. Okay.
Awesome.
That's equation number one. That's the easy one.
And that one, I'll just, a quick add on too. That one I recommend using with a buy and hold. If you're using 70% loan to value financing on the end, right? I like the Burr strategy. And if after it's fixed up, we're going to pull out 70% in a new loan,
Yeah.
then I still like working with that same formula, because that means you don't have any of your own money in the deal at the
Right.
end.
Right.
Right.
That and the banks are going to use that equation for doing their calculations as well. Right.
Yeah.
Right. The second equation is pretty simple in terms of, so it's the wholesale equation. So you have a property, I get it under contract at 45, and then I sell it to a fix and flipper for 50. My wholesale fee is $5,000 in this case. So after repair value times 70% minus the repairs minus the wholesale fee is my maximum offer. Now, I will put in a plug here. If you're a wholesaler, you better intend that house is sold. So if you can't find a buyer, then you better buy it. So you need to be in a position where you can do that transaction, because
wholesalers who can't actually close that contract one way or another get a bad name very quickly.
Very do. And yes, and and if the house, if I was just normally going to buy the house, I'd be paying 50 for it. But if I can get it for 45, I just made an extra $5,000. So why not?
Right. Yeah.
All right.
There's no downside to that, as long as you want the house, right?
Well, as long as you and you have the funding, and that's where hard money lenders come into play. So the third equation is the one that's complicated. And this is the one that applies to rentals. So you need to do, for the Burr strategy, you need to do the first one, because that's where your refinance is going to come from. But if I'm looking at it from a standpoint, I want to be a landlord, then I need to understand what all the possible income is, what all the expenses are, including my set-asides. So I need to set aside a percentage for vacancy. Right now it's 5%. I need to set aside a maintenance number. This is the stuff that eventually is going to fail just because it does. And if I'm going to replace everything, so my repair budget's huge, then I'll use 5%. If I'm going to say, yeah, that roof has another 10 years on it, I'll probably increase that number to 10%. And then property management can range between 5 and 10% in your area. You essentially become the property manager if you're going to manage it yourself. If not, it's already built into the equation in case you decide, down the road, I want to do it. So you're taking 20% right off the top as an additional expense. That keeps you really safe. Okay. So now you're going to say, so I've got expenses, I've got to set aside expenses. So I take the income minus the expenses, and including all of them. And that number is called the net operating income, NOI, and it's calculated on a yearly basis. And that number, so if you're in the multifamily space, you're completely familiar with this equation, because that's the equation that they use, net operating income. And in the multifamily space, then you simply divide that yearly number divided by the purchase price, and it gives you what's called a cap rate. So you can compare building to building that are completely different. So you have, $1 million building compared with a $500,000 building, because the cap rate on the 500 is 10%, and the cap rate on the $1 million building is 5%, that means the smaller building is actually a better deal. Now,
Right.
we're
Right.
generally not in multifamily space, so we're going to be working in the single family space. So you take that net operating income and you subtract off whatever monthly profit that you want to have. Okay, so let's say we want $100 a month. So we'll move it back to the monthly basis. We'll do, so we've calculated a net operating income of $400 and we subtract off our profit of $100. So now I have $300. And this is where that handout that we've been talking about, that you talked about at the beginning, is that. So we're going to calculate your all-in mortgage price. It's kind of like that's after we did the 70%, that number is your all-in price. So your all-in price on a fix and flip is your purchase plus your rehab. So 70%, right? Okay, well, in the case of the single family using a rental equation, you now have $300 worth of monthly cash flow that you can apply to a mortgage. Well, there are 4 numbers, and any 3 of them, you can calculate the 4th one. Normally, you say, my principal is $100,000. I want to borrow $100,000 from the bank. My interest rate is 6%. I want to do it as a 30-year loan, and I calculate my payment. We're going to reverse the equation. So we know what the payment is. That's the 300. We're still going to use the 30 years. We're still going to use the 6%. But now, knowing those 3 numbers, we can calculate the principal. There's a simplification here. That number is your offer. No, excuse me. That number is your offer minus the repairs, because you still have to do the repairs. So
Right.
If that number calculates out to $70,000 and your repairs are $20,000, then your offer is still 50 based on that, right? Because your all in is 70. So you can play with a few of those numbers, because you can play with the interest rate. So right now you can get, an investor can get a 6 or 7% or 8% mortgage. There's a simplification that I do that makes that equation easier, and that is, I'm assuming that all the money is calculated as if it's borrowed. But wait, I'm going to use some of my own money. I'm going to put $100,000 in against this house. Well, what's the opportunity cost? So you don't have the money to be able to do something else. How much is that costing you? So to simplify things, and it makes it way simpler, rather than having 4 components, you have 1. So is that your money that you put in is calculated at the same rate you would borrow it from the bank. So all of it uses the same. Well, maybe I want to do a first and a second. So my first is from a hard money loan, and the second is, I got some private money. A friend of mine says, "Oh, I'll give you $5,000 to help it," yada, yada. You just kind of lump all those together and say, okay, I'm going to use 6 or 7% as the calculating number. And it keeps it simple enough that you can come up with a number. You still want to cross check it with the original fix and flip number, because if you need to sell it, it's probably going to get sold at that number, but you're looking at cash flow, right? And so it gets more complicated. And one of the reasons the gurus don't teach that cash flow equation is because it's hard, because you have to know all these numbers. What about lawn mowing? What about snow removal? Does the building have water? Is it common water? So you the owner has to pay it. There's a whole lot of expenses you have to at least look at and say, no, the tenant's going to pay that. No, the tenant's going to pay that. And so you have to calculate that in. And what's the rents? And the nice thing is that if you can increase the rents and decrease your expenses, your building got more valuable. So,
Right.
so those are the three equations.
It's great. I love it. I love it. I think so many people, especially on the buy and hold side, just get hung up, and especially when they start wrestling with amortizations. What if it's a 20-year, 15-year versus a 30? And
Yeah.
there's just too many variables. So I think when you break it down that way,
Yeah.
it gives people a much better way to figure out what is their actual deal that they're looking at. And as Scott and I mentioned, he's going to provide a deal calculator. It's going to have all three of those formulas on it, and that is just free for you to download and use. You can find that at truewealthinvestors.com/Scott K. All right, and it'll have the three formulas, spreadsheet. You can put in the numbers and use it to look at your deals. All right. I really appreciate you sharing that, Scott,
Sure.
and all of the information. I know you and I are both talkers, and we spend a lot of time just chatting and rolling things,
Oh, yeah.
ideas around, so we could talk forever. Um, but for people who really like the conversation, want to learn more about you, how do they find out more about you, or how should they contact you?
So I have a website. I also have a Facebook page. The website, let me move out of the way here, move this direction, is howtohackrealestate.com. And you can see it over my shoulder. Get there. Great, great. And just remove all the spaces.com. And then if you want to get on a call with me, get on my calendar, it's howtohackrealestate.com/call. And you can tap into my calendar and we can schedule a call and we can go from there. I like talking, as you might figure. I do have a course that I'm putting together, and so it's starting before the Dayton RIA, so we'll have to get that repeated. So
Yeah. Well, I encourage everybody. I know Scott personally. He's a genuine person. What he talks about, he is actually living out, and he's transparent in everything that he's doing. And so I encourage people to reach out, schedule a call with Scott, and see if you guys are a good fit and would like to work together. So, and we'll have the website or the link in the show notes description. And we'll also have the link for the download in the show notes description. If you're listening and can't hit that link again, it'll be truewealthinvestors.com/Scott K. All right. Thank you again, Scott. I appreciate you coming on, taking the time to
yeah,
share your story and your information. I know it's going to be really beneficial to people. Look forward to seeing you next week at GD RIA. That'll
yeah,
be great. Anybody in town, local, come out and join us for the main meeting. You can find information on the location and time at gdria.com. All right. And as always, I appreciate you. We'll see you next week, and keep building your dream life one door at a time.
thank you. Have a great time.
We are adding new episodes every week, so make sure and subscribe and check out all of our content at truewealthinvestors.com.